Okay, so this is Chuck Stihl 025. I've already opened this up and taken it apart once. Everything was not too bad. I took off the muffler and the spark arrestor was not clogged. Uh, the carburetor is a little different than what I'm used to seeing on these Stihls. I've never done a consumer model of this vintage, and the carburetor only has one adjustable needle. Usually they have a high and a low set screw for the needles in the carburetor. This only has one. And of course it has the idle adjustment screw as well. The other thing that's different about it is there's no impulse line per se. It's usually these things have a separate tube going to the carburetor. This has a little hole in the plate, which we'll take a look at in a second. But the problem with that is it makes it hard for me to test for any leaks in the oil seals around the bearing. Okay, see here we're looking at, there's only one idle adjustment screw, so the little cover that comes with it only has one hole drilled out. The other one's there, but it's solid. Maybe if we're lucky, the new carburetor I ordered for this will have two adjustment screws and would make it easy to tune. So I had taken this carburetor off previously, cleaned it out, soaked it, reconditioned the gaskets, put it all back together, and this thing starts, but it won't stay, it won't hold. You let go of the throttle and it dies. And it appeared to be a rich stall too. It didn't ramp up before it stalled. It just stalled. All right, so here we're looking at the carburetor with the one needle adjustment screw right there. And then, of course, it has the idle adjustment screw, but it's kind of odd. I've never seen one like that before. The other thing that's odd is that it doesn't have, again, the impulse line. It just has a little hole in the plate there. You probably can't see it when I hold it up here, but there's a little hole in the plate between the carburetor and the cylinder that the crankcase impulse, which would pump the fuel in the carburetor, is transferred through. Usually there's a tube coming up out of there that I can test. All right, so here we go, opening up the new carburetor from Farmertec, and they look pretty much the same, except, hey, look at that. It's got two adjustment screws. That's what we're used to seeing. So that's great. Way to go, China. All right, so we're going to put this thing on. So here's a little side note. I found that I tested the fuel tank line. It was fine on the inside. On the outside, the vent tube was all corroded and falling apart. So I put a piece of fuel line on there, and right here I'm just plugging it with a little set screw, and then we'll test it to make sure that it vents properly. That little screw keeps the fuel from spilling out readily when you turn this thing over. So here we go. We're going to pull some vacuum on the fuel line. I've already tested it before I did this to make sure the fuel line itself was fine, and it was. So here we're basically pumping the fuel out of it, and it's pumping the fuel, and it's not making a vacuum, which would mean the vent is working properly. So that's not a problem. And back to putting the carburetor on. The carburetor is a little bit difficult to get on and off because there's the fuel line is really tight around it, and you have to pull it out and get the carburetor in front of it. It's not the best design I've seen, but so it takes a little bit of time to get it on there. So there's some editing here. What else can I say about this? Hopefully this new carburetor works. Okay, so hey, we have to drill another hole in the little cap that goes over the adjustment screws. Easy. So you can see I put a new air filter on. That air filter assembly goes over the carburetor, and then the two retaining nuts go over that. So we're getting that little cursor put on there, and we'll tighten down the carburetor, put this thing back together, and try it out. Hopefully everything works out okay. So did also put a new spark plug on there just for good measure. I never tested the spark, but I was able to start the saw before. It just would not hold. It would just stall immediately when you take your finger off the throttle. And I messed with it a good bit just trying to make what we had work, and it wouldn't. All right, here we go. So it works. That carburetor works like a charm. Alright, if you've made it this far, you should consider liking, sharing, and subscribe. We have lots of chainsaw videos and some other fun stuff on here. I'm going to turn the idle down on this a little bit. There we go, that's better. Alrighty, as always, happy hunting, Nimrods.